Hey, so at the end of the last video, I said I was going to start giving hints as to what the next video will be, which I will again do at the end of this video, and the last one I pretty much said, what if Victor Frankenstein turned out to possibly be a bit of a Nazi? Well, this film answers that question, a grotesque B-movie, creature feature, steampunk-esque body horror set in World War II, that I can easily declare the most insane found footage film I have ever seen. Welcome to Frankenstein's Army. So it wasn't until I played Resident Evil Village was this ridiculous schlock first brought to my attention, after one of the game's final chapters, in which the player fights through a factory of mechanically engineered monsters, was accused of ripping off the premise and even just outright plagiarizing one of the film's least memorable monsters. Frankenstein's Army tells the story of a Soviet reconnaissance unit initially deployed to destroy a sniper nest and clear the path for the approaching Red Army, only to receive a mysterious distress call from another unit said to be under siege at a factory not far from their location. After deciding to reluctantly investigate, surprise surprise, the unit find themselves ambushed by mechanically deformed soldiers who slaughter each of them one by one as they learn about the creature's elusive inventor, Victor Frankenstein. Now, over the years, many people have requested all sorts of Nazi zombie media for me to cover, like Dead Snow and Outpost, but I just don't see the appeal in any of it. It just does nothing for me. It takes something particularly unique and, I'm going to say memorable, but what I really mean is something to actually truly break me in some way to make it worth talking about. So here we are. At least when I covered Overlord, its Wolfenstein-esque experimental super soldier world domination plot works surprisingly well as a gruesome, commendably serious war movie more than I had any right to, thanks to excellent practical body horror, intense fight scenes, and punchy, impactful performances. Frankenstein's Army has a lot of these qualities to help it stand out amongst other generic Nazi zombie nonsense, but it's still ultimately all style, no substance. What you see is what you get, a gory, farcical, tongue-in-cheek play on Nazi Frankenstein. In fact, you could say the title itself is a significant hindrance as it spoils any avenue for surprise, as you pretty much know exactly where this is all going from the start, so while there is a lot of WTF regarding the monsters they encounter, their origins aren't sustained with any sort of mystery. Fitting to the concept of Frankenstein, the film is a chaotic infusion of styles and genres without ever wholeheartedly committing to one thing other than its grisly and inventive practical effects. It starts as a somewhat modest satire of Soviet World War II propaganda, then unravels into a steampunk-esque Nazi zombie robot splatter flick that also happens to be a found footage film, which is ironically the least realistic component to a story about, well, do I really need to repeat myself? Now, I know what you're thinking, Ryan, how does 1945 found footage work when their camera is full color HD, has a 16:9 aspect ratio, and an automatic focal lens? Well, while I personally wasn't too distracted by it given how absurd the film is, I understand why it will take many people out of the experience. It's a bold choice, I'll admit, doesn't pay off despite a thoughtful setup, especially when it occasionally uses old-timey lens distortion to make it seem like a camera from that era, which inadvertently calls more attention to the issue than if it were to just never address it at all. I mean, in theory, you could chalk it up to being a possible meta farce on the inherently contrived logic of found footage films, but let's be honest, I think its only reason to exist is to facilitate a sense of claustrophobia and chaos, and hide the potential blemishes of making a low-budget war movie. In that respect, I argue it helps because most of the film is set in tunnels and confined spaces where the creatures just suddenly and unpredictably appear out of nowhere, adding an abrupt intensity that reminds me of those House of the Dead light gun games. In fact, I find myself treating it more like a POV film than strictly found footage because there is an element of scale involved that makes you feel small and overpowered by such broodingly weighty creatures that constantly get right in your face. However, there's no denying the found footage is a significantly missed opportunity if we look beyond the simple, not so serious, but still maybe too serious premise it's going for. I think it would have been interesting and more unique if it actually attempted to emulate photography of the time, akin to how Apollo 18 did it. I can understand they don't want to obscure the tremendous effort put into the practical effects and design for each monstrosity, but in an alternate universe, I can see this working as a relatively serious and ambitious horror film about Nazi experimentation and the depravities of war, which the film does initially dabble in. Hell, it could have even worked as a modern mockumentary about uncovering Soviet footage, but at this point I'm just projecting the theoretical film I want to see, so let's stop there and get into the nitty-gritty of the film's events. However, before that, this weird obscure topic is made possible thanks to this video's sponsor, Incogni. So the problem with signing up to anything that involves forfeiting personal information to access a service is that your data can be sold to data brokers who then sell that information freely to other companies and individuals without you even knowing it. Maybe you've been receiving constant spam emails or oddly specific letters and phone calls. Just the other day, in fact, I received a phone call regarding pension insurance, and before I hung up, because I knew it was a scam, it was worrying how much specific information they had on me. On the one end, they might bombard you with advertising, but on the other, that data can be used for nefarious purposes. But thankfully, data brokers are required to remove your data if you request, but given how potentially dozens, if not hundreds of firms store that data, it's unrealistic to send individual requests to each of them. Incogni is designed to do all that for you. Simply sign up using the info you want removed, grant Incogni permission to operate for you, and they handle everything else, including sending out automatic removal requests to any new brokers that pop up, so you can get on with your life hassle-free and hold on to data that is rightfully for your eyes only. The first 100 people who use my code ryanhollinger using the link below will get 60% off Incogni, so there is no easier or better opportunity to protect your private data today. Frankenstein's army is framed from the perspective of Dmitri, a film graduate who claims to be making a Soviet propaganda film about the unit's heroic escapades, but in his efforts to frame the group as brave, victorious soldiers fighting for the monumental prosperity of their motherland, none of it reflects the reality of the situation. We witness massacres, brutal slayings, and just the all-out devastation and wastefulness of war, with the unit even attacking and pillaging a rural village that's quickly censored by the commander. It's a compelling setup that frames these men as so battle-hardened that they're left numb by their actions, eventually exposing their hypocrisy when they cry foul at Frankenstein's despicable experiments, when they themselves are just as guilty of savagery and cruelty. They have little compassion in them besides mercy killing, because after years of witnessing and suffering from the effects of being a soldier conditioned to die for their country, death and destruction is all they know. However, while it does suggest a loose moral conflict in how their behaviour comes from trauma and a desperate desire to survive a deadly landscape, it doesn't explore past the surface of its setup, as little effort is made to develop the characters, or the innocent German family who get caught in the crossfire of wanting to escape a village that's been ravaged by the creatures. When the unit arrive at the location after crossing foreboding corpses alluding to past failures and victims' efforts to escape, they find themselves taking shelter in a dilapidated church, where outside lays a cindering pile of nun corpses. It evokes a striking image of innocence and sanctuary being long dead by the ravages of war, and all that's left is Frankenstein's Hieronymus Bosch-inspired hell on earth of tormented minion abominations and madness, fitting the ubiquitous sentiment that war is hell. It's soon followed by them discovering and awakening whatever the hell this thing is that disembowels the unit's commander, spiraling them into disorder and confusion as tensions over leadership ensue. Of course, they end up doing what they do best, and that's capturing and interrogating a caretaker using violence to locate their missing comrades, only to be warned of the elusive doctor before being ambushed by his creations. When it comes to the creatures, each of them are genuinely unique in appearance. One minute they have hooks for hands, the next they have an Iron Maiden for a head, and then they have a plane propeller for a torso, because why the fuck not? It's actually a lot of fun to see what might pop up next. It never hits the highest levels of imagination, but there is a good balance of nightmarish absurdity without falling into outright laughter. For example, on paper, the idea of a Nazi zombie robot with drills for hands sounds ridiculous, but in practice, the overbearing presentation and gore effects make for a decent sense of peril. Sadly, however, anyone looking for depth beyond what you see will be left severely disappointed, since it sort of peaks once the creatures arrive on screen, and the plot itself kinda withers into nothing. It adds a bit of substance when they discover that no shit, the distress call was a lie, while Dimitri reveals he was actually hired by the government to either capture or kill the mysterious doctor, and the point of filming any of it wasn't for propaganda, but simply further reconnaissance in the event the mission was a failure. He later goes on to suggest that he had no choice in the matter, as the government are holding his family for ransom until the mission is complete, and that the capture or kill motive is actually a plan B in the event Frankenstein rejects a job offer from Dimitri to work for the Red Army to make their forces stronger. He eventually meets Victor Frankenstein after the group abandon him for withholding the truth about the mission, culminating in a rather unremarkable exposition-heavy finale where the rest of the group are captured or transformed off-screen. Disappointingly, there isn't much to Frankenstein as a character. He's simply a descendant to OG Victor Frankenstein and looking to continue his legacy with supposedly noble intentions, but it's deliberately left vague how earnest he is about his motivations. He believes he's discovered the cure for war by wanting to fuse together the brains of the purest Soviet and Nazi to create the ultimate soldier to achieve world domination or something like that. It's cartoonishly basic and becomes another missed opportunity to explore small tidbits of information Frankenstein reveals about his past, where he was formerly a prisoner in a concentration camp before working for the Nazis, then eventually escaping. The thing is, it seems to imply, at least from my perspective, that he wanted to escape the horrors of humanity's deepest depths of depravity and use his powers for a greater purpose, but ultimately became just as consumed by the desire for power, making him no better than the monsters he once served. In that respect, it doesn't take advantage of the subtext that Frankenstein simply wanted to advance science and human evolution, but all it did was deprive him and others of whatever innocence was left in the world during one of the most devastating periods in history. It would combine with the previous motif of a destroyed church being a false sanctuary for the soldiers, only to be attacked by what are essentially man-made demons ravaging Earth. Of course, many will say I'm overthinking it, but I truly believe there is something to this bastardized perception of the army, creating the ultimate killing machines in the most literal way imaginable. Put it this way, it sets up the perfect full circle by opening with soldiers who only know death and destruction, then having them be faced with a hellish exaggeration that reflects how little humanity is left in soldiers, taken advantage of by rulers who simply seek to dominate. Like the propaganda that bookends the film, heroism is sold as a virtue, but in a war as disastrous as this, it comes at the cost of being human. That's why embedding the story of Frankenstein into World War II is a potentially brilliant idea. The themes seep through, but the film never capitalizes on what it has. The film ends with Dimitri being deceived and set up for experimentation, but before Frankenstein can commence, he's shot and beheaded by the Soviet unit's youngest soldier, who takes the head and Dimitri's camera and receives full honors for a successful mission, leaving Dimitri to be torn apart by the Soviet Nazi Frankenstein as the factory is carpet bombed by the Red Army. We end with an image of the soldier alongside Stalin as the credits roll. And that is Frankenstein's Army. I can't believe that is actually a movie. Next time we're going to be talking about two found footage films, one very good, one very terrible, that explore just what exactly makes extreme haunted house attractions so incredibly appealing on Halloween. If you want to leave your guesses in the comments below, please do, and until next time, stay safe, stay away from robot Nazis and, well, Nazis in general, and I'll see you all very soon. Can't believe I said that. Bye!